Imagine yourself going on holiday with your son. You fly to paradise, but then disaster strikes. You slam your head into the table in front of you. The plane is shaking violently. You are going down. You are going down. You wake up and you see your kid being taken away from you. A man covered in red takes him. A delicious meal. Sounds fun, let's play. In the forest, sooner or later you run into cannibals, who will jump and attack you. Wandering the forest, you can find the camps. You find half-complete bodies, the rest presumably eaten. But why would these people resort to cannibalism? Maybe because you haven't subscribed yet? But there might be a few different reasons why people would resort to cannibalism, so let's check it out. In situations of extreme starvation or limited resources, people may resort to cannibalism as a last resort to sustain themselves. When faced with the absence of alternative food sources and the threat of starvation, consuming human flesh may be seen as a means of survival. There was a famous story called the Andes flight disaster that happened in 1972. A plane carrying 45 people crashed into the remote Andes mountains. The survivors were stuck there with no help or civilization nearby. They didn't have much food and couldn't contact anyone for help. As time went on, they faced hunger, cold and injuries. They were in a really tough situation. To survive, they made the difficult decision to eat the flesh of the people who had died in the crash. Eventually, after 72 days, 2 survivors were able to hike for several days and find help. They were rescued, but during the time in the mountains, they had to resort to cannibalism just to survive. In the forest, the inhabitants of the island seem to be cannibals, but it doesn't seem to be in the situation where they have to be. Unlike the survivors in the Andes, the conditions in the game are actually pretty nice. We are looking at a comfortable 25 degrees Celsius across the board. We have a gentle breeze flowing through the region. And as for the sky, we are blessed with the most clear conditions today. A perfect day for a walk on the beach. There's plenty of food in the game too. They could hunt animals, fish, eat berries and mushrooms, but strangely enough, they mostly target other human characters in the game. They don't seem to be doing it out of necessity for survival, since there are other options available. So if they don't do it to survive, why do they? Let's take a look at the psychological side of cannibalism. Sometimes individuals who engage in cannibalism have underlying mental disorders or psychological abnormalities. This could include things like sadism, psychosis or specific paraphilias, which are basically really extreme and unusual sexual kinks. For some people, consuming human flesh can actually sexually arouse them, or they may have fantasies about being eaten, and not in a moderate or typical sexual way. It can also be driven by different delusions, such as gaining power or having control. A well-known example of this is Jeffrey Dahmer. He had some disturbing sexual fantasies that involve dominance, control and a fascination with dead bodies. He found sexual pleasure in dismembering and manipulating his victims' corpses, and cannibalism was part of his sexual rituals. Over time, Dahmer's obsession with his fantasy grew, and he needed more and more extreme experiences to satisfy his urges. As he continued to commit murders, he became increasingly focused on preserving body parts and consuming flesh. He believed that by eating his victims, he could somehow preserve a part of them within himself and maintain control over them even after they died. It's likely that his troubled childhood and history of alcohol abuse contributed to this disordered thinking and violent behavior. However, it is important to note that Dahmer's case is just one example of an individual with such tendencies. There are only very few similar cases, and in the forest, we see that almost everyone in the game is involved in cannibalism. And cannibalism is not genetic, or passed on from generation to generation, so it couldn't be created over time. Cannibalism is influenced by a combination of psychological, cultural, environmental and situational factors. So, if it isn't genetic, then it's possible that it's taught or learned behavior. But even if cannibalism was the norm for the inhabitants of the forest, we still wonder who started it and why nobody made an effort to stop it. If we look at the history of humankind, cannibalism has been practiced as part of rituals, warfare or cultural traditions. These acts may be associated with religious beliefs, symbolism or ceremonial practices. If cannibalism would be part of these rituals, then it makes sense for everyone to participate. So, what could these rituals be? Cannibalistic rituals are cultural practices that involve the consumption of human flesh as part of ceremonies. A few of these ceremonies or rituals has been documented over the years. One documented ceremony is called ancestral veneration. In some cultures, consuming a deceased person's flesh is seen as a way to honor and connect with ancestors. It is believed that by incorporating the flesh of the deceased into their bodies, individuals can gain the wisdom, knowledge or power of the ancestors. Also, consuming the flesh of the deceased was seen as a way to guide the spirits or ensure the proper transition into the afterlife. Another way cannibalism was used was during warfare. Certain societies have engaged in cannibalistic practices as part of rituals associated with warfare. This could involve consuming the flesh of defeated enemies as an act of triumph or as a way to absorb the strength or courage of the vanquished, but also to intimidate the enemies. And let's be honest, seeing people eating your fellow soldiers would be extremely discouraging. The last documented ritual are spiritual ceremonies. Some spiritual practices incorporate cannibalistic elements. These rituals involve symbolic or ritualic consumption of human flesh, or the ingestion of body parts to achieve spiritual communion, purification, or transformation. In real life, the Aztecs were known to have practiced cannibalism as part of their religious and cultural beliefs. Their approach to cannibalism was intertwined with their complex mythology. It was believed that the gods sacrificed themselves to create the world and to sustain its existence. As a means to honor the gods and maintain the cosmic balance, the Aztecs saw human sacrifice as a necessary act. Captives from wars were selected for sacrifice, and their hearts were ritually removed as an offering to the gods. In some instances, the Aztecs also engaged in cannibalism during these sacrificial rituals. After the hearts were removed, the body of the sacrificed individuals were often consumed by the priests, warriors, and nobles as a symbolic act. It was believed that by ingesting the flesh of the sacrificed, they could gain the divine essence and power of the gods. The Spanish conquerors who encountered the Aztecs during the 16th century often overplayed the accounts of Aztec cannibalism to justify their own colonization efforts. So it probably wasn't as bad as it seems. Probably. This could make sense for the forest though. There are a lot of signs that point this direction. Throughout the forest, you may come across multiple ritual structures. For example, the effigies. These structures often depict humanoid figures in various poses, some of which are reminiscent of ritualistic symbolism. They are typically found in encampments, suggesting the cannibalists' involvement in occult practices. In certain areas in the forest, you may encounter sacrificial sites littered with bones, skulls, candles, or other ritualistic objects. These locations imply that dark ceremonies or rituals have taken place there. As you explore the island, you may discover various items and artifacts that carry occult symbolism, such as totems, charms, or idols. These objects provide glimpses into the occult beliefs or practices that might have been present on the island. So a lot of evidence points to that the inhabitants of the forest are cannibals because of spiritual rituals. But it could be even tied to religion. In several cases, you can find Bibles, crosses, and crucifixes. The in-game lore says it's left by Christian missionaries, but it must have had an effect on cannibalism since some even painted crosses on themselves. So what does that Bible say about cannibalism? After the global flood, God gave Noah permission to eat meat. Everything that lives and moves about will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. Everything that lives and moves, including human? Well, in context, no. But out of context, maybe. For example, this woman said to me, "Give your son, that we may eat him today, and we will eat my son tomorrow." So we boiled my son and ate him. And on the next day I said to her, "Give your son, that we may eat him." The cannibals could be impressionable, read this and acted on it. Or maybe they are just mutants experimented on by crazy scientists who programmed them to attack and eat other humans. Either way, instead of eating each other, let's just like and subscribe. That's way more fun. Nom nom nom. By the way, I'm not sure why the mutants are called cannibals. The only person we actually ever see eat human is the player himself. I guess we're all just projecting.